Good day, everyone, and welcome to Rehab Gaming. So, in this episode, we're actually going to be taking a shell that we got off of AliExpress, and we're going to be putting it on this Game Boy Advance SP here. As you can tell, this Game Boy Advance SP has quite a few scratches on the top and the bottom. The shell's a little worse for wear. It also has this burn mark over here. So we're going to go ahead and do a complete shell swap on this handheld console. So stay tuned and we'll get right at it. Before we get started on tearing down our handheld, what we're going to do is going to go ahead and open up the packaging on this replacement shell, and then we're also going to talk about what I have over here. These are actually going to be replacement hinges for the new shell. What commonly happens is when you're trying to disassemble the old shell, these hinges can get broken by trying to disassemble the screen part from the base of the console. So I ordered a couple of these extra just in case those break in the process of us trying to get these console taken apart, because like I said, it is quite common for that to happen. Also, if you do plan on taking your console apart, make sure that you at least have some replacement parts for it, because unfortunately with a Game Boy Advance SP, you will damage certain components on your shell, and we'll go over that a little later. So with our new shell replacement, we actually got a new sticker for the back of the console that has a serial number on here. Now this is going to actually stay in my collection. If you're going to reshell a Game Boy Advance SP handheld, you are going to have a hard time trying to get the original serial number sticker off of the old case shell. And also, if you ever do plan on selling something, you need to let your buyers know that what they are purchasing is a reshelled handheld. So let's go ahead and open up this console packaging here for our shell. The screen portion comes out, and then the base of the shell comes out. And what they like to do is they like to take all of the small parts that you need to put your console back together and put them on the inside. So on the inside here we have our screws, some of the little dots to cover the screw holes that are here on the face of the screen. Let me get that in a picture. There we go. So it'll cover all of these spots here on the face of the screen. These on the console that we are going to be fixing are covered with little pieces like this. So these are easily damaged when you try and remove them. It is technically possible to not damage them too much to where they are reusable, but just make sure when you're buying a replacement shell that they do come with these parts here, just in case that those get damaged in the process of taking them out. And I noticed that the cool thing about this shell is it actually included a Nintendo badge right here, so we don't actually have to take off this badging on the original shell. We can just affix that to our new shell. So as we take a look at the top half of the lower section of the handheld console shell, you'll notice that it actually comes with replacement rubber pads. This seems to be a decent replacement shell. It's not by any stretch of the imagination a perfect shell replacement, but it is of decent quality. I mean, it feels okay. It feels of a decent quality plastic, so I don't anticipate having any issues putting this console back together. And the reason why that I wanted to go with this blue is because it did quite almost accurately match the original console color. Even though it's not 100% accurate, it's close enough. And the only thing I really wanted to do is just try and restore this handheld that we have here. That way it just looks a little better. So in comparison, what we're going to do is we're going to take the little dots and kind of hold them up next to one another, and you can kind of tell that there's a little bit of a color difference. The screw covers that come with this kit are a little lighter in color, so if it is possible to get these off of here without damaging them, it would be great to be able to try and reuse them. And then also, just for personal preference, I would actually like to reuse the A and B buttons and the start and select and then the directional buttons and everything else, I want to try and reuse those from this actual Nintendo shell. And then I also want to try and reuse the rubber pads underneath and then just save these for another console that might have issues or something like that. That's just a personal preference. You don't necessarily have to do that. So just to go over the quality of the replacement case, one of your best indicators for these cases is how well that these areas where the cutouts are for the ports on the back are actually cut into the plastic. This doesn't look too fantastic. We'll try and get you a little better view there. They're a little gnarled up. They have a raised edge on them. You can also see some slippage on the cuts. So when they were making the cuts, they actually slipped a little bit, and they're not perfect. However, you can file those down just a tad bit just to make them look a little smoother and cleaner when you get it ready to put all back together. So what I did in order to clean up those edges, I took this little handheld file here. I got a file set from Walmart. I believe it was like $5. It came with about 6 of these. Some were half circle, triangle shaped, flat like this, a combination of a couple of those. And I went ahead and filed this seam on the backhand side so the lip is not as pronounced. It doesn't look too horrible, but with me being the picky person I am, I will definitely notice that. However, it's going to be a lot better than looking at this with the burn here and all the scratches on the top and everything else. It'll be more aesthetically pleasing. So what we'll go ahead and do is take the new shell casing, set it off to the side with all the parts, and we'll dive into getting this handheld taken apart. So now that I got all of my new shell pieces set off to the side, the first thing I like to do before I even work on these is remove the battery out of the backhand side of the console. That way I don't run the risk of damaging anything or shorting anything out while I'm pulling the console apart. Now we got our battery removed, and underneath the battery cover there is a screw that's hidden back here. You also have a screw that is right here. This holds the top and bottom half of the lower shell together. And we also have 4 screws, one in each of these holes, that need to come out as well. Now, just to note one thing, Nintendo in their infinite wisdom actually gave you the ability to use a small Phillips head screwdriver to get the battery compartment off and replace the battery, but they used a tri-wing security bit in order to secure their consoles together. So you're going to need to get a bit driver set that has a small tri-wing driver that can actually get down in here and get those screws taken out. Alright, so what we took out of those 4 holes is a tri-wing screw that looks like that, and it's a brass color and it's a little longer. This is what came out of one of the battery compartment areas, and then right up here where the game cartridge goes inside of your handheld. So just keep in mind that the 4 longer screws go in the 4 corners of the lower side, and the slightly shorter screws go here and here. So now that we have all of the screws taken out of the bottom half of this console, what you can do is you can just lift up this bottom section and set it off to the side. We'll go ahead and look at the buttons and stuff like that. Also the shielding here, there's also a nut right here down in this side of the console shell. This nut is what the battery cover screw actually goes into. So it's not plastic that it screws into, it's actually metal. So which means that no matter how many times that you're going to take the battery cover off of this thing, it's highly unlikely that you're going to be stripping the holes in your console shell. Now I'm going to come back to our replacement shell, and we're going to go ahead and look at what they use as a method to secure the battery compartment, and try and get the pieces separated here. Looks like you are actually going to have to take out that square piece and put it inside your replacement shell. So it's a good thing that we decided to look at that, and I don't see one of these nuts in... Oh, never mind, I do. So it looks like they were kind enough to actually give us one of those nuts for that area of the bottom half of the shell. So I'll have to keep that in mind when I'm putting this one together, that I need to put that in before I even try to screw in the battery cover. So another thing that I wanted to compare on both of these shells, we'll go ahead and scoot this up off of the side. The one on the right is going to be our replacement lower, and the one on the left is going to be the original. The only real difference that I can tell with either one of these is just the cartridge slot guide over here, the type of screw that they used for that. Otherwise, this looks almost exactly the same. It's like they actually had a mold for this console shell and they just went directly off of that mold, which is great for us. Means that we're not going to have too many issues with fitment or anything like that, and this seems to be a decent quality shell replacement, so I'm pretty happy with the quality so far. And I know I said in the beginning I might actually replace some of the buttons. I took a look at both the power switch on the original and on the aftermarket shell. They look to be made of the exact same plastic material. They seem to be of similar density, so I'm actually going to leave these triggers and the power switch in the new half of the casing, and we'll just go ahead and use those. So now that we have this console opened up, it looks like we have a total of 1, 2, and 3 small Phillips head screws. I'll zoom you in here so you can get a better look at that. Try and get our lighting here a little better. There we go. Scoot this over a little bit. Perfect. So it looks like we have a total of 3 Phillips head screws that we need to take out just for this board to move. Now, we need to be extremely careful once we get this board loose. There is a ribbon cable that's on the back hand side here that goes through to the screen, and we don't want to damage that ribbon cable because we're going to be reusing those parts in our new shell. Alright, so now that we got all 3 of those screws taken out, we can go ahead and lift off the inner board. Do so very, very carefully without doing any undue damage to this ribbon cable right there. This is the ribbon cable that I was talking about that you don't want to put a lot of pressure on because you can damage it, and if you do so, you're not really gonna have any other choice but to replace the screen. So what I like to do is, yes, these buttons are falling out and being a real pain in the butt, but I'm going to go ahead and take a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to unlock these 2 tabs. I'm going to release this ribbon cable. That way we can separate the board from the screen here. Alright, so we went ahead and unlatched the ribbon cable right here on this lock arm, and this actually had just enough tension on it to snap out of this connector right here. But also what I want you to note is that your speaker is located here. It's not actually directly attached to your main board. How it connects is it has these 2 connection pads that connect to these 2 pads here on the main board. And so over time this can oxidize. So as preventative maintenance, what I like to do, especially before I'm going to put all this back together, is just clean up all of this board area with some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip. And we got some dust bunny stuff running around in here. It's quite obvious that this Game Boy got quite a bit of use, so we're going to give her a good cleaning before we transplant all the parts back into the new shell. So one of the other things that I like to do when I have the main board out of the handheld is to clean up this game connector here with a toothbrush that I have. Now, it actually used to be an actual toothbrush until I unfortunately broke this stupid thing, but this has some nice thin soft bristles that gets down into this cartridge connector really well. I can give that cartridge connector a good scrub, brush all the debris out of there, and we can go ahead and set this off to the side since it's ready for assembly. And then I went ahead and went over the contacts for the speaker that are right here, and then I went over the contacts on the actual speaker itself. Alright, so now is the unfortunate part of trying to get all of these little pieces off the face of the screen and trying to get these pieces here off the side of the screen and get the hinges pulled out of their recesses without damaging them. This is the part where 9 times out of 10 you're probably going to break something. That's why when you buy one of these kits, you want to make sure that they have a bag of replacement parts for you. So if anything in this case is damaged or lost, especially the screws that I have over here off to the side that held the main board in and held the shell's pieces together, in case you lose one of those, they give you all new replacement screws with the kit that I got as well. So we're going to go ahead and find something that is thin and pointy enough to try and get underneath these little covers here, get those off so we can expose the screws underneath. So this is a prime example of exactly what I meant by these getting all tore up. So I have a little extractor tool that I use for pin connectors, and I used it to try and get up underneath this little rubber piece right here. That one was actually up in this corner, and for some reason the glue just had such a good hold on this here, and this seemed a lot more brittle than the rest of them, and it just pulled apart into 3 different pieces. That actually looked like this half rounded dome shape with a flat bottom here, and then the other circles actually came out decently enough. They can be used, but since this one got tore up for the corner here, I can't use this other one. I'll keep them as spare parts, but yeah, I won't be able to use them for our replacement shell. So now that we've exposed the screws here, we can go ahead and take those screws out. The biggest thing is just trying to get your screen out of the handheld, and then we're going to see if we can try and not have to pull these hinge pins, but still be able to get the screen out. I don't know if that'll be possible or not, because there is this cover here for the screen that the ribbon cable actually goes through. So we'll take a look at that and see what we can do. So once you get all of your screws out with your tri-wing screwdriver, what you can go ahead and do is you can close the lid and you can lift off this back piece, and that exposes your screen on the other side. So here's what I was talking about with the ribbon cable. It's actually curled up around this and fed through to the other side. Now, it will fall right out like it just did there. However, when we open up this section, we have this section of screen hinge right here that's housing the remainder of the ribbon cable. And then we'll just look at the bottom side, and it looks like there's a pinhole right here, and there was a screw that held it in. So it looks like what we can actually do is pop this little cover off of your screen. So I'm going to try and do that right now. So I was looking at that area and I noticed it didn't want to pull up, and it looks like I actually missed a screw right here, and it looks like that is going to be, of course, inconsistent with what we normally have in this console. Looks like there's this one lonely Phillips head screw right here underneath your ribbon cable that takes off that little hinge cover. So we can get to this ribbon cable, we got to remove that screw so we can get that top of the hinge cover off. So let's go ahead and do that. So I got that screw out. Let's go ahead and pick up on this whole assembly, and look at that. This is that little cover piece that I was talking about that I wanted to get off, and this is where the rest of the ribbon cable goes through to the bottom side. So we can go ahead and take off the screen, and this is what it looks like inside of there. So when you're putting your new screen back onto your shell, what I would suggest is go ahead and attach the hinges here on each side of your new shell, get that all assembled and on there, and then you can tuck your screen in, and then we'll just start the breakdown process in reverse. So now we have the screen out, I noticed that there is a nice little ring of dirt and gunk and all over the place on this screen. We are going to be reusing the screen cover for our new shell, so we just need to get that all cleaned up. Now, if you did have a screen that had some scratches on it, mine's in pretty decent condition, but if you had a screen that had some scratches on it, you're probably going to want to go ahead and replace it at this point before you even put it in the new shell. That way you don't have to bother with trying to tear it down again. So we'll get the screen all cleaned up, get it seated into the shell, and we'll attach the hinges to the new shell. Alrighty, so we got the screen all cleaned up. I mean, there's just a little bit of garbage on there around the edge. It's nothing that's going to obstruct our view, so I'm not too worried about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this piece of our new shell. I'm going to take our screen. I'm going to go ahead and set it right inside, and it just drops in there perfectly. So another thing that I want to do is to try and get the bottom half of the shell assembled, kind of like we have here with the shell that we just broke down. I want to get these hinges in there, make sure those hinges work right, and then I also want to get the cover on here, and right here get it all tied down after we get the ribbon cable stuck in there. That way we can get this console assembled back together. So we got all the old parts up out of the way. Looks like this ribbon cable wants to turn just one more. I really don't want it to, because what I want it to do is I want it to be like this when it goes up in there. That way it is inside the console correctly. But for now, we're going to install the hinges so it can just relax. We're going to go ahead and take this side with the buttons, push it down in. We're going to leave the screen out like that. Oh, wait a minute. You know, it would kind of help if you actually put the screen the right way around. Then you might not have that issue. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and leave the screen like this. You can go ahead and set this off to the side, that way nothing happens to it while you put your hinges in. But this is where you're going to be feeding your ribbon cable for your screen down into the bottom side of the console. So we'll go ahead and take the screen, set it off to the side, that way we don't drop it or break it. And we will take our hinges that we got out of our bag, if I can find it. There we go. Take our replacement hinges here, and we're going to get out a set. Alright, so I decided to get a couple of hinges that are of the same color, and let me grab a pair of pliers here, and I'm just going to show you how these hinges line up. So, I don't know how well you can see that. So this outer fat part has a thin groove in it, and the inner part that has the little clips here has just a little bit wider groove in there. So you got to make sure that the groove of the screen and the base of the shell are lined up while you're trying to push this in. That way these go in the groove properly, and that the clips come through and snap on this side. So you'll see these clips on this side of your screen hinge here, and just make sure it gets fully seated in there. Make sure they're not going to fall out. It doesn't matter which hinge goes in what side, because I'm going to demonstrate here just because it's a little bit stiff. So I can rotate this hinge clockwise. I can also rotate it counterclockwise. So it doesn't matter which hinge goes on which side of your console. Just make sure that the tabs for the screen and the base line up to one another when you're putting the hinges in. So real quick, I also wanted to show you how the end caps come off of the hinges. So on these hinges, this is going to be the hinge itself. Now when you buy hinges that are used from people from Etsy, they're going to have this gray piece here on the outside. That gray piece is actually the colored piece for the hinge. And in order to get the color piece off so you can put your replacement hinge colored ends on, is there's going to be two slots on one side of the hinge, and that is going to get pushed up. And we'll show it halfway through. It's going to look like that. And then it's going to slide all the way off. So on your new hinges, if they just came without any of the caps on them, you won't have to worry about this step. But if you bought the actual hinges from I think it was someone who disassembles a lot that is broken and damaged beyond repair, and they sell out the parts for that lot, and they just leave on these little caps here because it's not worth for them taking them off. So if you get them that way, go ahead and take those caps on. Make sure you replace them with the proper caps before you even try and stick your hinge in here, because after you stick the hinge in here, you'll have to contend with trying to deactivate the clips on the inside and pushing it back out, and there's a possibility you can damage your hinge. Now, I did notice that on my replacement tips, there is a little nub there that I'm going to have to file down. So when you're dealing with these replacement shells from AliExpress and the quality just really isn't there for getting them all trimmed up and ready for install, that's why it's extremely important that you do have a set of fine files that you can take that little bit of material off. That way it goes in without any problem. So we got the new colored tips on the hinges, and they're ready to go inside of the shell. So in order to line them up, what you want to do is just kind of push them in halfway like that. Make sure it gets lined up. Push it in a little ways, kind of rock it back and forth. Make sure it lines up with the other side of the hinge. Rock that back and forth, and you'll just feel it drop into place. If you're pushing too hard, you got something misaligned. So just go ahead and finagle with it. There you go. You felt the click. And then kind of wiggle it back and forth until it seats into the grooves for this part of the hinge. There we go. And now it perfectly went in, and that's what it looks like when your hinge is completely seated. You see the clip parts on the inside here. I'll go ahead and get that a little closer. See the clip parts on the inside here completely engaged to the inside of the hinge here, and then you just do the same thing with the other side. Once you get your first side of the hinge in, it's really easy to get the other side lined up and pressed in, because you don't have to worry about wiggling it back and forth. Everything should already be lined up. Just make sure that your hinge is lined up with the internal grooves, like so. Stabilize it on this side, push in, feel that first click and the second click. Sorry, I moved the camera there a little bit, but it takes a little bit of force to get these hinges in there, and then they function just like they should. But also do take care when you're moving the hinge back and forth. Don't lift it up too much on the top side, because you're putting a lot of strain right here. It doesn't have any of the screen or backing to support it, and we're going to leave it down like that so we can go ahead and install the screen. We have our freshly cleaned screen. Go ahead and set it in here, and what we're going to do is we're going to hold the screen in, take this ribbon cable and kind of angle it down. So you see how this side's pointed. You're going to want that to go down into this slot right here first, and then work the rest of the cable down in, and then it'll come through the other side and look like that. And so I went ahead and left this cardboard backing on for the time being so the buttons didn't fall out on me. That's another tip. You might want to leave that cardboard backing in while you're trying to install the screen. And then what you do is you take your top half of your replacement screen cover and you set it right there on top. And then you go ahead and screw that in, and then you can take your little piece here that is your trim piece for the hinge, drop it down in like so. Make sure that you're not pinching your ribbon cable. Make sure it seats. You got a little bit of a wiggle room there. You can flip all of this over to the other side, support that side of the hinge here, and then put that screw back in. So we replaced that screw right there to hold on our hinge piece right here on the other side. So now what we need to do is we need to open up the hinge very carefully. and we need to replace all 5 screws for the screen assembly. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Now I did want to mention that all of these screen screws up top are going to be your tri-wing, and the one right here that's going to be your Phillips screw, that one's going to be slightly longer than the other 2 Phillips screws that you took out for the bottom half of the shell. So make sure you get that longer screw in here for this covering for the hinge where the ribbon cable sets inside. So now that we've got these screws put in, we're going to wait to put on these little rubber covers. First, we're going to go ahead and take the board and stick it back inside the handheld. And first we'll remove our little holder. But before we do that, we got to do something with the speaker. So this little black felt piece kind of looking thing right here came off with the speaker from the other console, and that actually goes in first. Then you take your speaker for your console and then drop it in on top of that. So once you get that put in, your board is ready to go back in. Now this is where it gets a little bit touchy and kind of flustering, because you got to make sure that your pads stay in there, but you also have to seat the ribbon cable back into your board here. Now there's a couple ways to do this. You can use a pair of tweezers like I have here. Be very gentle with your ribbon connector and then plug it back in. Or you can kind of do similar to how we took it apart, kind of lay the board down and rock this forward, and if you just so happen to dump out everything, don't worry about it because you can put it back in, and then slide your ribbon cable back into this connector, and then make sure you push the locking system in so the ribbon cable is secure. But after you get it tightened down, make sure you don't put any stress on this ribbon cable and tear it. That'll be one of the most frustrating things as soon as you get this all almost put back together, to tear the ribbon cable for your screen and then have to go and get a new screen. Alright, so we have our screen plugged back in. We're going to go ahead and take our little speaker filter thing there, drop our speaker down in there, and we're going to go ahead and slide the board down into place. Now, after I get this done, what I like to do is take the back cover of the console, just sit it in there. Don't forget to put that nut back in for your battery cover screw. Also, don't let your power switch run away from you like mine just about tried to do. And go ahead and take the whole top assembly, put the 3 screws in for the board, and then drop the bottom half on, put the battery in, and then do a quick test to make sure that everything powers up, your screen comes on, and everything's working properly. So we have our 3 screws in for the main board. We're going to go ahead and take our bottom shell and sandwich it together. Now, when you look at this right here on this seam, you're going to have a little bit of an issue with trying to get everything to drop just perfectly into place. One thing I like to do is try and pull out the buttons just a little bit so it'll slide in there, and just make sure that you're not binding on anything. Your power switch actually goes inside the hole it's supposed to, and if it's not working, kind of like this isn't right here, don't force it. Just start all over again. Try and get everything seated. The biggest problem with these shells especially are these little posts for the right and left bumper. So they might need to be wiggled one side to another in order for them to get lined up, so you can actually get the console sandwiched back together without everything binding up, just like that. So as long as it sits down in there and it seats back together, you know that you got everything lined up. Now, just to hold this in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 4 corner screws, and they're all going to be tri-wing bits screws. So I'm going to take those, I'm going to drop them down in here, try and get them to fall in their hole. I'm going to send them home. Make sure you don't over tighten them, that way you don't split the post on the inside. I like to do from corner to corner when I'm putting screws back in, because what you're doing is you're actually putting even pressure across the entire assembly as you're screwing everything together. I know my big fat hand is in the way, and I apologize for that. We actually got 2 screws in right now. This is going to be good enough just to test. So I'm going to grab my battery here. I'm going to put it in, power it up, and there she goes. She's working perfect. I have my green power light on the side. It's working. It doesn't have a game in there, which is not gonna boot. So let me actually go find a game, and we'll double check the buttons and make sure that they're working. Alright, so I located a copy of Crash Nitro Kart. I know that this actually uses the trigger buttons, so we'll go ahead and use this game to test. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. It's coming on. Buttons feel okay. Got decent response. Trigger buttons feel like that they're okay. They're not binding up or anything. Screen light's working. Yeah, we'll do arcade, single race, and easy. Let's turn the volume down. That's a little loud. There we go. So it looks like our A button's working good. Uh-oh, got a problem here. I have no steering. Well, that's not good. So we're gonna have to double check and figure out why the steering wasn't wanting to work there for a second. It looks like left is not wanting to work for some reason. Oh, now that I press it harder, it'll work. So let's go ahead and turn this off, and I'll go ahead and troubleshoot it and figure out why the directional buttons aren't functioning like they should. Okay, so I went ahead and broke the console back down, took it all apart, everything looked fine. So what I'm willing to wager is that since I only had 2 screws, one on either side put in, and not all 4 screws were in the backhand side, that there was an issue with the directional pad actually hitting the button down below. So we're gonna go ahead and try to test this again. Stick the battery back in here if I can get it in the right way. Stick the game back in. Power up. And we'll test it a second time. Alright, let's try this again. There we go. Seems like the button is responding now. Perfect. So this one actually works. We're jumping, we're turning, and problem's taken care of. So all we need to do now is take our rubber pieces, excuse me from bumping the camera again. All we need to do is take these rubber pieces, put them back on the screen, get the battery cover back on, and she's ready to go. Now we got all of these little rubber stoppers in. Just so you know, these do not come with adhesive on them like the original ones, so they're just pressure fit. So there is a possibility that these will fall out on their own. So in order to prevent that from happening, what you can do is you can take some spray adhesive. I believe 3M makes some. You can spray it on the back side of these and then insert them in once the spray adhesive reaches the proper tackiness, and that way they'll stay in there a little better. So the only thing we need to do with this console is to put the Nintendo badge back on and to put this model number sticker on the backhand side of the shell. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So here is the Nintendo badge. The best way to line it up is to use one of the corners, stick it down in there, move it to the center, and then make sure you go across it like so, and make sure you hold down so that it sticks into place. Nintendo badge is all put in. Turn it around. Take your rear serial number sticker, pull it off of the backing, and then we're going to do this the same way as well, except what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the bottom edge, as a guide. So we'll take it, well, let's try and use the top edge. That might work a little better. That. There we go. Now that looks pretty darn good. Smooth the sticker down all the way around. And that doesn't look too bad if I do say so myself. So we got the Nintendo badge on, we got the back sticker on, and that wraps up this console shell change. And it looks pretty good. I mean, I do understand that, you know, this is an AliExpress special, so it's not going to be, you know, extremely high quality, but the plastic feels okay. It closes fine. Get that nice snap because it's a factory Nintendo hinge. The seams are okay. There's a little bit of edge right there because of overflow from the plastic mold. It really didn't get trimmed off too well, but that's okay. We can go over it with a razor blade and just kind of smooth that out. But everything else looks pretty darn good. So that wraps it up for this project. If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. So without further ado, thank you for stopping by, and we hope you have a wonderful day.